Hello and welcome back, Eddie Radosevich. George Stoya here from the SoonerScoop.com studios. Josh McCuistion back in Houston HQ, and another Monday here as Oklahoma coming off of a 25-15 SEC opening loss to Tennessee. We'll do this today. We're going to do two different videos. I know that we get a bunch of Josh's thoughts on the Oklahoma game. Obviously there's plenty to talk about. We're going to do two different videos. So this is the recruiting report. We're going to stick to the recruiting side of things. Josh, welcome in. I know that you've been busy. You went to a pair of games last week, including seeing wide receiver commit Gracen Harris.
Yeah, Grayson, it was an interesting night for him. Had some big catches, had some big plays. Got removed from the game later in the game, had a helmet throwing incident. I don't think he was ejected from the game so much as his coaches kind of said, hey, go cool off. So it wasn't the night he had hoped for, but he had some nice plays. It wasn't a thing where I walked away thinking, and I know he's at times, I think some people have said, how does he fit in this class? What's he going to be? I think Grayson Harris is a good player. He's just he's a little smaller than some of the rest of the class, and I know right now that's kind of
probably not the best thing to add.
Taboo topic. Yeah. So that's the reality, but he is a very good guy after the catch. He's got some return ability. I mean, there's things that you can absolutely make use of with Grayson Harris.
Kaufman wins the game 55-28. Obviously, Grayson Harris plays for Harris, so it was a frustrating, or for Ennis, plays a frustrating night all the way around. Let's go to the tape, though. Grayson Harris did have over 100 yards of offense, including a 15-yard touchdown reception in the night. And, just overall, what did you see from him? Obviously, he's a two-sport guy, an exceptional baseball player as well.
Yeah, you can see it here. I mean, look at his change of direction, his acceleration. He's a tougher kid. Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, smaller guy. He's tough. Like, he plays a lot of safety for Ennis. He'll stick his nose in. He'll make a hit. Like, he's not a timid sort as a slot receiver. Again, like you can see it here. They do a lot of different stuff with him. They're going to try to get the ball to him in a lot of different ways. And this is him on coverage with Aljour Miles. Almost had an interception. Yeah, if you go back and watch it, I mean, he is inches from making that pick. Like, it's so close to happening, and I know he thought he got it, but you can watch it. If you go real slow here, you'll see it just bounce right before it gets to him. And, I don't even think it bounces. I think as he's grabbing it, he can't control it in time, and the ball gets to the ground. So, again, I like Grayson Harris. I liked him when I saw him as a junior. I liked him as a senior. And, again, part of me include, I know people say, well, why would you talk about, him not playing the last, few minutes of the game or whatever? It's because I think he plays with an edge. Like, he has some attitude about him. This is not a slot receiver walking around with his sunshades on the sidelines or anything like that. He is a guy who likes to mix it up.
Josh, you mentioned not the biggest guy, 5'9", 160 is what he's listed at on 3. I don't know how accurate that is right now, but is this a guy that can come in and play right away for Oklahoma? I know that you look at that wide receiver room right now. We'll see what it looks like moving forward with Oklahoma, but is he somebody that you could see coming in and contributing? We've seen a lot of true freshmen this year come in and play quite a bit.
Hey, if Zion Raggins can come in and play, this kid can come in and play. And I don't mean that as a slight design. I just mean Zion's very small, very undersized. Yeah. And Grayson's bigger than he is by some distance. Doesn't have the explosive speed, but I do think probably more refined as a receiver at this point than Zion was coming out of high school. So do I expect that to happen? No, not really. With all that Oklahoma should return at receiver, with how good I think some other pieces of that wide receiver class is, there'll be contributions from that freshman group. I wouldn't expect it to be Grayson Harris, although I couldn't rule out him as a punt return guy. Like, I could see him doing that if Oklahoma felt, next year when Peyton Bowen, the weight is more on him in that secondary, maybe they don't want to put him as a risk quite as much if they can avoid it. Maybe a guy like Grayson Harris could step in and kind of be that player that they'd need.
Same game. We're going to go to the 2026 class, a guy that I was super impressed with, Josh. Aljour Miles out of Kaufman. listed as an athlete, Kaufman, Texas, obviously, but holds an Oklahoma offer. Massive night against Ennis. 6 receptions, 152 yards, 3 touchdowns in the 55-28 win.
He was unbelievable. The thing that I love, guys, and we just talked about, you don't want to hear about Gracen Harris being too small. I wasn't on the field. I didn't have my camera equipment with me. I'd never seen Aljour Miles before. I was walking out there and I was like, that's him. Like you didn't have to guess. Like you knew that's the guy I came to see. And look at his arms and everything. I mean, his wingspan has to be 6'7", 6'8". He is tremendously long. And I would say probably 6'2 and a half, 6'3", maybe. Like I could get there on him. I would say 6'2" for sure. And then you kind of think about it. There's just not a lot I didn't like. Again, he was willing to mix it up here as a blocker. It's one of the reasons I included that clip. I liked his ability to do that. He's willing to use his size. He's willing to bully a DB. But they used him in a lot of ways. They loved this crossing route. They cooked Ennis with that route where they just run him on a little drag kind of between the linebackers and safeties, and Ennis didn't figure it out all night. They just couldn't get an answer for it. And again, I liked a lot of what I saw, and I think he is a guy that brings a different body type than some of the guys that we're watching Oklahoma run out there right now.
I was about to say, you could use a guy like that, especially the wide receiver blocking. That's impressive stuff, Josh. I'm looking at his offers here on 3. It's not a ton of big schools right now. Do you think teams are going to start identifying this guy as a priority? And I would assume he's a priority for Oklahoma moving forward.
That's definitely my impression, is that Oklahoma is high on him, really likes what he brings. I would say a big part of his offer list is there's probably twofold situation here. First is that he is a guy that just hasn't played a lot. I'm sorry, not hasn't played a lot, but plays in a school that, frankly, people don't go by that often. Kaufman's not a place where you say, we got to get by there. And out in East Texas, where you're talking about the Tyler schools and Lufkin and Longview and all these great programs that produce guys all the time, there's going to be some places where you say, I didn't get by this spring. I didn't get a chance to go see that guy. And so he mentioned it when I talked to him, and I've got a story coming I need to write up where we talked after the game, and he mentioned that Emmett Jones coming out to his school and seeing him. He said he was one of the few coaches that did that, and then they offered him. And I think Oklahoma is in very good shape here. I think they've done a great job. He mentioned, just liking the family feel, kind of mentioned, it's almost where he's fighting himself at times. Like you can tell Oklahoma's out in front. He's got to figure out when he wants to do all this. And, I'm not saying he's got to decide when he wants to commit to Oklahoma. He's got to decide what his timeline is for whatever his decision will be. And so whenever that comes, I think Oklahoma is going to be right there with anybody. And I do think he brings a skill set that matches well, because in frame, he's kind of similar to the Elijah Thomases, the Cortez Mills, kind of bigger, longer armed guys, but he's bigger. Like I made the comparison to a couple of guys that were there. He's a little like Malcolm Kelly at the same age. Like he's just so big-shouldered and long-armed and kind of muscular already. Now, he's not quite as tall as Malcolm was, but that same, that's a big guy that you line up outside and you can throw him some jump balls and he'll make some plays.
That might answer what I was going to ask you, Josh, just in terms of projecting him into the future. Straight wide receiver, no worry about, or I don't know if it'd be a worry, but any idea about moving him to a tight end position, because he already is listed at 6'3", 200.
Yeah, is it possible? It is.
Sure.
Again, he's a big, broad-shouldered kid, but I don't think – I think it's one of those things where it's positive. Like, if he grows up and he's 225 pounds as a sophomore and you're like, well, okay, you could put him as your move tight end and do some stuff with him. Okay, fine. Kind of like a James Hanna, like as OU used him years ago, where he was just very athletic and speedy and they could do some things with him. I don't see him having to grow out of it and say, well, he can't play receiver. He's got to be a tight end. So I don't think that's going to be the case. I think if Oklahoma were to make that move, or if any school were to make that move, it would largely be just out of necessity.
Sure.
Out of him growing into it more so than he can't do it at wide receiver.
No doubt. Sounded like a pretty good game. Kaufman looked, from the highlights that you sent back, pretty damn good. I would have to think that Ennis struggled a little bit on Friday night as well.
Yeah, it really was a good game. Kaufman, Ennis came in as the favorite. I mean, for people that don't know, Ennis, not that long, I mean, it was 10 years ago they won their last state title. Ennis just used to be a big-time program. I think they've got 5 state titles in their history, something like that. It's a very good program through the years. It's produced a lot of players. I mean, you go back and look, I believe that's Graham Harrell's hometown. So, in fact, I'm almost certain of it. I don't know why I'm doubting myself. But yeah, so I mean, they've had a lot of good teams through the years. They're struggling right now. They don't have it defensively. They're lacking the pieces they need. They went in as the favorite in this game, and there was no question. Kaufman was the better team. I got the impression, one of those like young, like a team that you see that's kind of young or has a new coaching staff, and you're like, the light's starting to come on. This group's starting to figure out what works for them, what doesn't. That was the impression I got, is that Kaufman, like I said, they found that play with dragging Miles across the middle, and they just went back to it. It was very NFL. Like, we know that works. We're going to keep doing that.
Good to check in on Oklahoma commit Gracen Harris. And I have a feeling this is not the last time that we're going to be talking about Aljour Miles, or you're going to be going to see Aljour Miles here over the next, I guess, really, truly 2 years as we get into the full swing of things in the high school ranks. You went to another game on Friday night, but before we get there, let me tell you about William and Lauren, the official custom clothier of Oklahoma football. William and Lauren outfits your favorite OU players in custom suits that boost their confidence off the field to match their confidence on the field. Their perfectly tailored clothing ensures every Sooner stands out in comfort and style at prices that make luxury accessible. Visit William and Lauren in Oklahoma City or online at williamandlauren.com. That is William, the name, William, and Lauren.com. Dress like a champion and make your style as legendary as OU football. A couple new looks, I guess, coming into the ranks this week. Trace Ford coming off of probably his best game in a Sooner uniform, all-red suit. I think I wore an all-red suit to a prom or a Christmas dance at one point in my life.
I wore a white one to prom.
Interesting. After Labor Day?
No,
I guess that's after.
I mean, it's
technically New Year, right?
Yes,
It's in the good times.
Yes.
WilliamandLauren.com. Check them out. Very good company. The second game that you went to this weekend, Richmond Randall ends up running away with it 45-7. You can check out the interview that Josh did with 2027 running back Landen Williams-Callis on the Scoop editorial page, obviously already up on the Crimson Corner. But Josh, 2027, a young kid, but he was super, super impressive.
Yeah, he is. For those that don't know, this is a relative of James and Jaquiz Rogers. So that kind of gives you an idea of the genetics you're talking about. A little undersized. I honestly showed up expecting him to be smaller than he is. He's probably 5'8", but he's 180, 185. I mean, he's well put together. He's a very muscular guy. And just exactly what you'd expect. Incredibly quick, wildly dangerous in space. But reads it well. Like, unlike a lot of these guys, and I've got to think some of this is, kind of his family background. He's not a guy that just bounces every time. He's not trying to, every play has to be a home run. He'll take what's given. And again, I didn't go there specifically to see him. I was really focused on Isaiah Williams, but the more I watched him, the more I liked what I saw.
You just take a look at the offer list, and for a 2027 running back, Josh, it is, if you want to dream about it and say that they've offered name big brand school in the country, they've probably extended an offer already to Landen Williams-Callis.
Yeah, he's going to have plenty of options. It's one of those things where, and you see this all the time in recruiting, where everybody's like, oh, we missed on Jaquez. We're not going to miss on this kid. We're going to go make that happen. So now it'll be interesting to see who really makes him a focus. I think right now he was so good as a freshman. There was just an idea of let's offer him and then we'll see where he goes. But what I saw on Thursday night, he's going to keep climbing. He's going to keep getting more attention. I don't think anybody's going to walk away. Again, look at him there. You can say, oh, he's a smaller guy. Look at him lower his shoulder and just bury that defender. And guys, the team he's playing against is Fort Bend Marshall. Fort Bend Marshall is a continual deep run into the Houston playoffs or into the Texas playoffs team. That this is the home of Devin A-Chain. I mean, you go down, Fort Bend Marshall's got some football players, and they had no answers for him, and they had no answers on the night. Randall's kind of an up-and-coming program, and they showed you why on Thursday night. They dominated a game that a lot of people thought was going to be one of the better games in Houston last weekend.
Josh, Eddie mentioned it. Obviously, he's got a lot of different big schools after him. I mean, like you said, his offer list: Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M. I mean, it's the big boys. But where would you say he is in terms of OU's priority? I'm sure he's at the top of their list in terms of running back. I know what Oklahoma wants in 2025 and 2026 in terms of running back. But I would assume is he their number one target at running back right now?
I would say he's up there. I wouldn't say he absolutely is the guy. I mean, because running back is, especially when they're this young, like sometimes you get coaches like at Randall where they're willing to, okay, we're putting that guy out there. We don't care. And then you get places that are like, we've got a senior that we're going to kind of hold this guy back. We're not going to run him out there and, let the freshmen get pounded on by a bunch of seniors, that kind of stuff. So there's still some guys that are going to develop. But, I mean, if there are 2 or 3 guys they like more than him come, a year from now, I'd be kind of surprised. I definitely think this is a guy that will have a committable offer from Oklahoma for the foreseeable future. He mentioned really liking DeMarco Murray, liking that, that NFL pedigree, kind of knowing his background. And he hasn't set anything up as far as a visit to Norman, but I got the impression that's something he wants to do. He'd like to get up there and catch a game and kind of get a feel for things. As we're going to talk about in the other show, maybe Oklahoma will want him to wait until the offensive line is kind of working at optimal levels. But, as it is, I definitely think there is legitimate interest.
On the other sideline, you mentioned him. One of the reasons that you went to the game on Friday night, Fort Bend Marshall's Isaiah Williams, 6'1", 180 safety. Didn't do necessarily a whole lot. I mean, Fort Bend Marshall surprisingly got blown out in the game 45-7. But what did you see from Isaiah Williams?
Well, from last year, what I noticed is he's starting to lean out a little bit. There were points when I saw him as a sophomore and thought, man, this guy may grow into a linebacker. He is because he's a big guy. You can see him here in the clips. Big, long, athletic guy, probably, 6'1" and some change, probably 190, 195 right now. Really well put together, but he's gotten longer as to where I felt like last year he was almost like probably kind of comparable to like Jaron Kanik when Jaron Kanik arrived. I don't know if maybe the 7's making me make that comparison, but that kind of guy where you're like, I don't know if he's a linebacker, if he's a cheetah. Like, I don't know, what it might be. But I will say with Isaiah, you mentioned him he got hurt pretty early in the game. And I don't know what it was. I talked to him a little bit. It didn't sound like it was anything serious. But he didn't get to play a lot, so I don't want anybody to draw this and be like, oh, he didn't make any plays. I want to say he played the first 2 or 3 drives and then was out the rest of the game. So not anything I'm going to put on Isaiah. Now, I will say he had some Texas gloves on. He had what was it? Texas gloves and maybe like the Texas towel or something like that. But I was like, okay,
the arm
sleeve.
He
knew I was coming. Yeah, arm sleeve. That's what it was. You're right. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a red flag. But then I realized Texas had sent 2 staffers there. I had Terry Joseph, their DB's coach, and Kenny, and I keep wanting to say Kenny Powers, but that's not right. Kenny something is the Baker. Baker is their defensive line coach. And he was there watching the Chase Sims kid that plays for Randall. That's a really good player on his own, but Oklahoma's not really involved there. We won't spend a lot of time on that, but I was impressed with him as well. So I think maybe that was kind of a tip of the hat to Texas coming out and giving him a look on Thursday night.
Safe to say that might be an OU Texas battle, Josh. I know that he's got some other big offers.
Kind of feels that way, guys. This is, I think the trap here, what concerns me is that a lot of the same things I was hearing about Jonah Williams at this point last year are the same kind of things I'm hearing about Isaiah Williams. I think Oklahoma feels good about where they are. Brandon Hall's built a really good relationship. This is one of his priority guys from everything I've gathered. This is the guy Oklahoma really wants at that safety position. And I think, he's made a couple trips up, really likes Oklahoma as well. So I think this could come down to an Oklahoma-Texas battle. A&M in that area of Houston is always – I mentioned Devin Achane earlier. They're always going to have a role in these kind of recruitments. But if it was outside of those three, I think that might be a little surprising. Maybe LSU, who they always do a nice job in Houston. But, again, I think he's a kid that will stay fairly regional, but this may come down to just a very old-fashioned OU, Texas A&M kind of battle.
Oddly enough, it was a really strange week for 2025 Oklahoma commits. A lot of bye weeks just coincided with one another. You can check out Josh's full breakdown of everybody in the 2025 class, as well as some of the 2026 guys as well, in what they did over the weekend in the Future Sooners feature posted every beginning of the week, Sunday night usually. In terms of guys that did produce, Kamori Moore had 4 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hurries. CJ Nixon had 4 tackles and 2 tackles for loss for Weatherford over the weekend. And 2026 quarterback Jaden O'Neal had a big night, 285 yards through the air, 4 touchdowns, 2 throwing, 2 running in a 35-31 upset over Cathedral. Anything really stick out to you just in terms of guys that had really good weekends?
The guy, and I think I've been fairly transparent in that Kamori Moore has always felt like a guy that I wanted to see more from. I wanted to see him do some things that made Oklahoma taking him and pursuing him so early kind of seem valid. He's a little on the smaller side. He feels kind of like a Grayson Halton guy to me in some ways. Now, I mean, obviously Grayson Halton's worked out really well, but you take those undersized defensive tackles and you just have questions about how it's going to go. But he's been very, very impressive. Blocked a punt a week ago. Like you mentioned here, had a really strong night. I like the activity that I'm seeing. I feel like he's getting out and playing in space, getting offensive linemen off of him better. He's finding a way to create pressure because he is quick. He is athletic. But when he's letting those offensive linemen get to him, it takes away a lot of his strength. And I think as a senior, his first 4 games, he's looked much better at creating that space and that separation that he needs to work in.
Very good. Just in terms of, we'll hit on it, obviously, being a recruiting report, big recruit reaction weekend, right? They had a bunch of guys. We were going there, Carey. We were going there. We were headed over. Trey Taylor, 2027 quarterback commit. I think that let's start there before we get into some of the other guys. I'm sure that when you bring in a quarterback on a unofficial visit and you see what you saw, a starter getting benched and somebody else coming in, and just the overall lack of production offensively, a lot of people would be worried. Doesn't seem like that's the case, though, for Trey Taylor in a story that you have written catching up with him over the weekend.
It shocks me, guys. His response to the game was, and I know people, I had some people on the board like, Josh, do you trust this? Do you trust what you're hearing? And he couldn't have been more sincere. It really caught me off guard. And for those that haven't gone and read the story, please go over to Sooner Scoop and do so. But he was talking about, the offense struggled, but as soon and he didn't know, I don't think he remembered the kid's name, but he's talking about Michael Hawkins. He goes, once that freshman got in there, all of a sudden they started moving the ball. I think he just saw that kind of, and again, I know we're going to talk about it more in the other show, but I think he saw, hey, there's plays to be made here. This offense can be functional. There are things that can be done. And again, I try to explain this to fans all the time. When you're talking about recruits, they don't have the emotional attachment to the wins and losses. This is just a school they're considering. So they don't get down. When things are bad, it's just like, oh, this isn't very good. The offense doesn't look great. But they're not emotionally beating themselves up over it. It's not the same response. So they can look at it. And then once it starts going good, they're like, oh, hey, problem solved. It's just a different reaction. And so I think that's hard for fans to relate to because they are so engaged in it. And obviously we love you because that's why you're here because you are so into it. But with Trey Taylor, again, he flat out said, my opinion of Oklahoma is higher after this weekend than it was coming into this weekend. Now, some of that is he loved the environment, the atmosphere. I know Obviously, you guys were there, but every player I've talked to, and it's probably about 20 at this point, they were just like, the atmosphere was crazy. The fans were nuts. So the fans deserve a huge applause. They saw on a night that it was tough to sell anything outside the defense, the fans did a lot to sell Oklahoma the program.
I will say, Eddie, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but
what are you hiding from me?
Well, I should have told Josh this. It honestly slipped my mind until we started talking about
this is fascinating.
Trey Taylor. But the way that the post-game press conference was set up, we had to go a different route to get in because I was coming from Josh Heupel's post-game press conference. And so we went a different route. We had to cut through kind of almost the locker room space.
Sure.
And right before Brent came into the presser, he was talking to Trey Taylor right outside of the door. And they just kind of gave a good embrace. And, like, you could tell Trey was, like, just his face was lighting up. And Brent was, giving him the whole spiel. And it was just a few seconds because I had to hustle to get into the thing. But I was just like, oh, that seemed like that went well. So, again, I don't know what was being said. But, like, I crossed and I said, that's Trey Taylor right there. And him and Brent kind of shared a hug in a moment. And then Brent had to go. He was getting ushered over to the post-game press conference. But I was like,
that has to be like one of the most super awkward things that a head coach has to do after going through that for 4 hours. And then you still having to put on a smile and talk to these guys because this is their moment, right? With the head coach, and then come in and talk to us scumbags.
But I think, though, and Josh, you can speak to this, guys get it. Right?
Sure.
Like, guys understand, that shit happens, right, in football, and that you're going to have games where you don't play well. But, I do think Trey's perspective is very interesting, but I think he's probably also viewing it as, okay, like, this coaching staff, if someone's not playing well, they're not afraid to put someone else into the football game.
Sure.
And then to see somebody like Michael Hawkins have that kind of success late in the game, I think I can understand his perspective of, like, oh, like, if I come in and I'm a good football player, I'm going to see the field. It doesn't matter if I'm a true freshman. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's kind of what I took away from that, Josh.
Yeah, and guys, I mean, Caldwell Catholic's 2-2 right now with Trey Taylor. So, like, he's not like, well, you guys lost the game. You're hot garbage. Like that. I think it's easy for fans who, again, are just older and have gotten away from competing and forget that, like, when you're in that, you lose a game. Yeah, it sucks, man. But you got another game coming up. You've just got to flip that switch and keep moving. And I think players, recruits can respond to that, and they can relate to it very easily. And I agree completely with Eddie. I can't imagine a worse thing for a coach than to have to deal with, like, trying to put the smile on and bring energy after you just had your guts ripped out. And then, okay, now we're going to go talk to the media who's, guys like George are going to ask jerk questions, and, like, you just have to deal with all that crap. So it's, it's brutal, but I don't think my impression with Trey was just very much that he loves Norman. He loves the people. He loves the coaching staff. He loves everything about being down there. Because, guys, this is his third trip from Chicago to Norman, Oklahoma since early June. He wasn't even really on my radar before that. So he's, and again, I believe he's told, I know he's coming back for Alabama. Like, he's going to make 4 trips to Oklahoma in less than 6 months. Like, that's not something a lot of guys from Texas do, much less a guy from Chicago.
Perhaps he just likes hitting Culver's on the way back and forth in between in the St. Louis area. Wouldn't be a bad option. There was a lot to like with the defense, right, Josh? I think that's quite obvious. Kaden Gebhardt was one of the defenders that was making his first visit to Norman, 2026 safety out of Ohio. Sounds like that was a pretty positive review just in terms of what he saw on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think people that are watching this are going to know Eddie bypassed Olentangy High School. He didn't go for it.
I just completely knew that I was going to butcher that and make myself feel like an idiot.
Well, the thing is, I'm not even sure I'm saying it right, so I'm just talking trash here, Eddie. But no, with Kaden, one of the things I will say is I was talking to someone who was around. I guess the thing I should start with, I talked to a lot of players. I would say most got a chance to really sit down and interact with one of the coaches, whether it was their position coach or Brent Venables obviously has a few moments there in the pregame where he's talking to recruits and making sure they know he knows they're there, that kind of stuff. Well, this is a guy, he talked to Brent, he talked to Zach Alley, and I had someone tell me, you could tell he was important to them. Like they like him a lot. And I know he actually has a relationship with the Powers family, with Reggie and that whole crew. So there's some familiarity there. And I think that could open that door for Oklahoma. Talking to Kaden, I didn't actually include this in the story because it's something, as our conversations have continued, he and I are just kind of, he's giving me more information, I guess you would say. He is kind of being looked at as an outside linebacker, safety, maybe the cheetah position. But it's clear they just kind of see him as really talented, and then, hey, let's let it work itself out where he may play.
Very good. And one more that we'll hit on, you could read much more in depth on SoonerScoop.com just in terms of, what'd you say, the 20 guys that you've caught up with here post-visit of Tennessee weekend? Will Conroy, another player out of Ohio, 4-star offensive tackle or interior offensive lineman, 2026 class. Where did things stand with him? And I'm sure looking at what he saw on Saturday night, it's a area that could use a little bit of help in Norman.
Yeah, this is a guy, I know being an Ohio guy, a lot of people have kind of locked on and said, oh, he's got to be this. The early buzz has kind of been around Oregon with him. But talking to him, I think the quote, he said something was like, these are the kind of people I want to work with or I want to play with or something along those lines. And it was kind of like, okay, like that's not a generic, you get the, oh, I had a great time and this was wonderful and the coaches were so kind. Like, you get that stuff all the time. This was a lot more telling of where I think his headspace is at. Now, again, you've got Ohio State, you've got Oregon, there are heavy hitters. Michigan has offered him. This is a big time guy that Oklahoma's going to have to fight really hard for. But I think they've shown in 2025 they can win some big battles or get some big-time programs. So now we've got to see. Ohio would be an unusual place for them to win on this kind of stage. But I wouldn't rule it out, and I do think he really likes Bill Bedenbaugh. He likes the staff, and I think he just kind of sees Bill as kind of a fit. Bill's a Midwestern guy. It kind of makes sense. So, I'm not going to say OU's the leader because I don't necessarily believe that to be true. But I do think they're right there with Oregon and Ohio State at the moment.
I guess overall, pretty positive experience for a lot of guys, obviously, outside of seeing Oklahoma play better offensively. The crowd was awesome. I don't know how you couldn't have walked in there or walked out of there, rather, and had any, I guess, bad memories about the OU fan base. It was an incredible atmosphere.
Yeah, and I think that when OU fans want to bring it, they bring it, man.
Yeah.
And with the amount of good teams that are going to come to Norman the next few years, I think you can anticipate. They got to win some football games, but
Sure.
I think you can anticipate it being a pretty great atmosphere moving forward.
All right, very good. Josh, I'm sure that there will be plenty more to come from the Tennessee weekend and all the visits that were happening. You can check out that coverage on SoonerScoop.com. It was good to catch up and see Gracen Harris, obviously, Oklahoma current commit, and then the Landen Williams-Callis interview you can see on the SoonerScoop.com editorial page, already up there, talking about his relationship with DeMarco Murray. Obviously a young player, but looked extremely good. That's going to do it for this week's recruiting report. Josh, we appreciate it, and we look forward to our next video as we get in a little bit more in depth on the team side of things for the disappointment that was Oklahoma's SEC opener against Tennessee. So for Josh, George, I'm Eddie. We'll see you right back here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel.